Now you're taking my time.
Yes, 7 seconds.
All right, thanks, buddy. I appreciate it. Good job. All right, we've got the latest now going on in New Hampshire. You're going to notice they're all going to rush to file this deadline over the next few days to get on the ballot in New Hampshire. This is the scene in Connecticut, New Hampshire, where Carly Fiorina is waiting to file the necessary paperwork. A separate dust-up here whether Bernie Sanders will be able to file in New Hampshire. There are a number of state officials saying, last time we checked, the guy's a socialist, and he votes as an independent. So he's not really a Democrat. So how can we have him in the Democratic primary? Now, in the latest surveys, he's trailing Hillary Clinton, but that could be a separate little soap opera developing here that Bernie Sanders might not get on the New Hampshire ballot. Way too early, and most people think that cooler heads will prevail and he will be on that ballot, but it does raise an issue. Is he a Democrat? Is he an independent? Is he a socialist? And how do you get him on that ballot if he doesn't go by being a Democrat? We'll see, but it's still early. All right, in the meantime, I do want to keep you up to date on the latest with Facebook. It is up another 5%. It's at an intraday all-time high. A lot of this on an unexpected surge in both revenues and earnings, better than thought. Here's what's rattling some investors, though, because it might be making a bigger economic statement. What's going on to Costco? You heard that same-store sales were down. The reason why that raises eyebrows is if penny-pinching consumers are not going there or not really interested in shopping there, then they must be hurting pups, and they might not be inclined to do much shopping this holiday season, right? That is the fear. That is the fear. And it is weighing on some in the market. So, of course, if you're online and on Facebook, you don't really care. All right. In the meantime, back to these polls, back to the race now about 4 days ahead of the big Fox Business debate on the Republican side. You've been seeing a bunching of characters and leaders, mostly having to do with outside-the-box type of candidates. And we're adding here, just for the sake of argument, the likes of a Ted Cruz and a Marco Rubio, who, when pooled with the likes of Ben Carson and Donald Trump, account for about 3 out of 4 Republican voters' sentiment. And the reason why I included those 2 senators is they're kind of outside the conventional view of an establishment candidate. So if you argue that most Republicans seem to be veering in that direction toward candidates who are not your traditional establishment types, and certainly doesn't a Jeb Bush know it, doesn't a Chris Christie know it, doesn't a John Kasich know it, then that could be telling us something. Bush 41 campaign advisor Mark Serrano on all of that. Mark, what do you think of that?
So, Neil, the timing of the debate is extraordinary because if you take a look at it, we're 88 days from Iowa. The new Fox News poll shows us coalescing around these 4 top candidates. I call them the 4 horsemen of the GOP since I'm a Notre Dame guy. And, Cruz and Rubio are definitely a part of that grouping. Coalition supporting around these guys is forming around them. So what I think happens now, and it'll happen at the debate, by the way, is where are these guys going to go next? Like with real estate, location is everything. So Trump, Carson, and Cruz are going to continue to try to go after the outsider mantle. But Rubio really is a more mixed bag. Particularly with his support for amnesty a few years ago, it's a bit of a stain on his record as a conservative. Where does Rubio go from here? I think Rubio, frankly, is the vulture circling around the other candidates who represent 29 to 30% of the polling who are going to end up dropping out over the next 88 days.
But don't the others who are ahead of him right now, the sort of contrarian types, don't they all have to tumble for him to have a chance?
No, I think he goes after Bush supporters. I think he goes after Christie supporters.
No, but I'm talking about the guys who are above him. The Carsons and the Trumps, and it's not quite the same with Cruz, but don't they all have to fail to clear, no matter what he does against the establishment guys, to clear a path for him? Because none of them seem to be giving up much ground, particularly Carson and Trump.
Well, one of them certainly would. One of them would have to drop out between now and Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina. But I really think that Rubio is going to position himself for establishment voters. It's the best place for him to go. Whereas Carson, Trump, and Cruz, I think they're going to have to actually go after some of Rubio's supporters right now. And we'll see that happen in the debates. They'll particularly criticize him on immigration. And you've seen Trump already doing that, viscerally over the last several days.
All right, Mark, thank you. Very good read. I didn't know you were a Notre Dame guy. This explains your brains. All right, thank you, my friend. All right, in the meantime, a lot of people say, you need that traditional candidate to have a chance of making it to the White House. That's what they were saying worked against a guy named Dwight Eisenhower in 1952, that he was a general. And yes, we had Ulysses Grant, who made it to the White House. But the fact of the matter is, few and far between outside of he and maybe Andrew Jackson could pull that off. And in the modern era, the argument was that Dwight Eisenhower would not be able to pull it off. Now they're saying the same about, let's say, a Trump or Ben Carson, that they're outside that proverbial petri dish. But my next guest, Diana Roth, says, you know, the Eisenhower example could ring true again, and compares both of these gentlemen to General Eisenhower in that way. Explain.
Well, I think that it's folly to disparage outsiders, because it's clear that that's what Republican voters are after. Donors are looking for the safe candidate, the Jeb Bush, the moderate with the track record. But voters are looking for somebody who can shake things up.
They are in the beginning, Diana, right? And then I always liken it to sort of spring and summer flings, and then the closer you get to the event, you settle, and I don't mean disparagingly of establishment types, you settle on guys you know.
Exactly. It's a little bit like flirting. You flirt with a lot of people, but then when it comes to marrying somebody, when it comes to getting into the voting booth, maybe you're going to pick somebody safer.
Well,
but it doesn't look like that right now.
That was my dating strategy in high school. I would always tell girls, you know, I'm built for comfort, I'm reliable and all that. It never worked, but I understand in politics now and then it does, right?
But right now, as we heard just now, it's the outsiders who are ahead. And it's people who are running against Washington who are ahead.
So you think that lasts a while? I want to pound this theme because you're very smart at this. You're very good at the history of this. And I always remind people, you know, everyone says this can't last. Well, it's lasted a while already. It's already beaten the length of staying on top of the polls for, let's say, a Donald Trump very quickly for Ben Carson. So it could last, right?
Exactly. And it's enabled Trump to actually put in place a good field operation in Iowa and New Hampshire. He's taken advantage of this. So he really is somebody to be reckoned with. But it's also the voter dislike of Washington, of traditional politics. It's the 13% approval record that Congress has. So these are all things that work in favor of outsiders. And even Bernie Sanders, he's not running on his record of decades in the Senate. He's running as an outsider.
Very
and
true.
Rubio and Cruz also running as outsiders.
You know, real quickly, I had Herman Cain on with me yesterday, and he was telling me the difference between the brief fling that voters had with him 4 years ago and now is that they're really sick and tired of being sick and tired. I love that play on that theme, that now they're angrier and more annoyed than ever.
They really are, yes. But of these four outsider candidates, Rubio has the lowest number of unfavorables. He has the lowest number of people who dislike him, if you look at the recent polls that just came out yesterday.
But he's a sitting senator. That always amazes me because he's a sitting senator, albeit a disenchanted one, an angry, restless young man, son of Cuban immigrants. But that is interesting because he's not exactly anti-establishment. He sits in the United States Senate, for God's sake.
Right, but he's a first-term senator. He's running against Washington. He has very low unfavorables. He's likely to go very far indeed. All
right. Diana, thank you. Very good reads on this. Meanwhile, there are other polls showing that these outside candidates aren't exactly flaky when it comes to the general electorate. In fact, Donald Trump would beat Hillary Clinton if the race were held right now. And some of these other guys would as well. But it's particularly Trump that it's amazing to watch here because despite this grenade-throwing sort of reputation he has, a lot of voters seem to be open to giving him a shot. Democratic strategist Christy Seltzer on that. Christy, what do you make of that?
Well, I think there's a big disconnect right now between the party's base, who obviously loves an outsider like Donald Trump, like Ben Carson, to some extent like Carly Fiorina, and the party's establishment and leaders who say, no, 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 we definitely need somebody safer like like the Jeb Bush or like the Marco Rubio. Why? Why are they saying that? Because they're looking not just at the Republican base, but they're looking also at indies and Democrats who don't want an outsider, who want somebody with some Washington experience.
But even among that group, now I know, and you were always reminded, polls are fleeting, they're snapshots, and they quickly are shot one snap. But when the general electorate is polled on this, Donald Trump gets the nod. Now that is a far cry from when he first entered the race. So either it reflects general voter anger on both parties and independents, or it's just a fleeting thing. What do you think?
I think it's a fleeting thing. I mean, there's other polls that definitely show Hillary Clinton with a much stronger lead against Trump, like an 8 or 10, even a 10-point lead.
You're right, but we're seeing more and more that he's not just this sort of party phenomenon, that he could be a general election phenomenon.
Well, I think they're seeing a couple things. One, obviously, there is the segment, particularly in the Republican base, that likes the idea that he's an outsider. But the other thing that they're seeing is they're perceiving his insults as, quote, strength. Now, I think that if you actually had to pin him down on policy issues, to the extent that he has been pinned down, he hasn't done very well. There's created a lot of backlash. And other times he'll just tell you, we don't really need to get into his policy positions, but he's going to be great on it. So I think that, that sets you up for a really different dynamic in the general election when he is going to have to be pinned down if he does, in fact, become the nominee. So there's some, to some extent, this is just the fact that he just hasn't been vetted as many times as we've seen him in debates.
Well, we'll see what happens. And we have another big debate, I'm told, in just a few days. Thank you very, very much. Good seeing you again.